Hi, I am Tanya Janka, also known as SheHacksPurple, and I wrote a book, specifically this book. It is called Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. And part of the book is at the end of every chapter, there are a bunch of questions, and these sessions every fourth Saturday for all of 2021 are to answer the questions at the back of the book and discuss basically what's in the chapter and then discuss what the real answers are. Because I have an answer key, but it's very short, it's very brief. And a lot of the questions are actually huge questions that could be many paragraphs or an essay in themselves. And so rather than making a 700-page book, I was like, why don't we have sessions and invite the community to come join us and talk about it together? And so this week, we are talking about Chapter 5, which is Common Pitfalls. This is an only 12-page chapter. It is the shortest of all the chapters, well, except for Chapter 11, where I just conclude and say bon voyage. But basically, we're going to cover the OWASP Top 10, because I was told if I don't cover it, that would be sacrilege. And then we're going to cover a couple defenses that were not previously covered in the book to make sure that you know those defenses. And my special guest this week is Bandana Verma, who happens to be on the board of directors for OWASP. She is the chapter leader for WOSEC Bangalore. She is the chapter leader for InfoSec Girls and InfoSec Kids for Bangalore. She does 1,000 things. Would you like to introduce yourself, Bandana?
Thank you, Tanya. I think I don't need to introduce myself. You've said already a lot of things. I would just say that I'm so honored to be on the show with you and talking about your book. You've been my mentor. You are an amazing friend. So thank you so much for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
I feel like we both equally admire each other, so it's a pretty good friendship deal. Okay, but I'll try to not fangirl over Bandana too much. Hi, Kellen. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everyone that's tuned in. I see there's a bunch of you. Yes. So I was thinking that we could go over, since we have someone from the board of directors of OWASP here, I was thinking the first thing we should talk about is what is the Open Web Application Security Project? For someone like Bandana, imagine someone's watching this and they're a computer science student and they've never heard of OWASP. What would you want to tell them?
So I will tell them OWASP is Open Web Application Security Project, which is a non-profit organization or a foundation. And it works towards improving the state of security of a software, bringing many projects together, helping with the projects, tools, chapters, and tens and thousands of members. And it's, I would say, it's an educational and training organization as well, because it tries to educate people, train people around web application security. So how I started my journey with OWASP as a volunteer, where when I got to know about OWASP, I was just knowing about it as OWASP Web Testing Guide. And then somebody introduced me to OWASP, that it's actually a huge organization or a foundation where a lot of people, hundreds and thousands of people around the world connect with each other via, if you go to OWASP.org, you'll see there are so many projects by different people. There are so many chapters by different people. There are events which are happening worldwide. There are conferences, there are project meets, and even there are things to include students, developers, not just security people. People from any domain can join OWASP to learn more about security.
And it's so welcoming. That's how I met Bandana. That's how I met Nancy Garishe and Nikki Becker from the OWASP DevSecOps show. It's how I met, oh my gosh, just the list of people in my life that I have met from OWASP is almost longer than the list of people I've met not through OWASP. It's just and there's chapters all around the world. We have over 300 now? And then literally hundreds of thousands of people that are interested. The Twitter account has 150,000 followers. And then there's the blogs, there's the cheat sheet series, there's the awesome tools that they make for free, like OWASP Zap and Defect Dojo and like Amass and Juice Shop, and like just like the list of amazing free things that OWASP and their volunteers put into the world is incredible. So you might be able to tell me and Bandana really like OWASP. we think it's pretty great.
Yeah, I remember you starting a conversation about love for OWASP.
Yep, OWASP love. Yeah, because there's just like there's so many amazing things they do, and I feel like I don't know how I would have got into security without them. Because like all the different events that they hold and like the local community within my city, all of the amazing people from OWASP who mentored me and shared resources with me, like loaning me books. Do you know what I mean? Or say like when I'm stuck on something saying, oh, try this, or have you looked at that? And I'm like, oh, yeah. So are there any questions in the chat about OWASP / have you all joined by now? So then the thing that comes next is I want to talk about the OWASP Top 10. Which do you want me to talk about, or do you want to talk about it?
I will. I think I'll start off, and I'm sure it can never be incomplete without you adding something to it. So OWASP Top 10 is the list of top 10 vulnerabilities which come every 3 years. And this one was supposed to be released in 2020, but then due to the reasons that we all know, due to pandemic and collecting the data, so it will be released this year. So stay tuned for it. And those top 10 vulnerability list is actually based on the data collected from so many organizations. And once that data gets calculated with a lot of permutation combination with algorithms, AI/ML done on them, then after that, it is actually showcased it to the community so that they can share their input. Because a lot of people have questions about, oh, okay, there is a top 10 list of vulnerabilities. But how does it come? It is just that OWASP decides about it? No, OWASP doesn't decide about it. It is decided by the community itself. Community vote for it. Community share their feedback, inputs, and it's actually open for the feedback. Like they tell you, okay, this is the duration where you can share your input. Even the best part is that you can get your name in the book. Let me tell you, it was very fascinating for me to know about it, that you can get your name in the book. How? Just by suggesting changes, inputs, and so much more. I've seen my friend's name there. Now, if I tell you what exactly those vulnerabilities contain, is basically, if I say injection is can be SQL injection, could be command injection, could be any other injection. So that is part of the top 10 list, and I think it's topping the chart for so many years. Like if I talk from at least from the past 2 releases, it is there. And people say, and actually not people say, but I would say it is the experts say, because I've been seeing the trend on Twitter, that it is there, it was there, and it will be there in the future when our kids will grow up. Now, yeah, actually, that is the exact thing that they're talking about. So where they say that the organizations and people are trying to fix it. Developers are working on it. Security testers and people like us, they are sharing inputs. But there are so many new things that are coming up that we tend to miss out on the old ones which are there. So it is very important to look at the basics, that how to get the basics right. I'll give you an example wherein I was working with the development team wherein we were trying to fix a SQL injection. We gave the fix to them. So there were actually remediation given to them. They just stitched it, like they put a band-aid on it and told us that it is fixed. And after testing again with so many more parameters, so many more vectors, injection vectors, it came again. They said, we just fixed this. Like, this is not actually how it works. So till the time we fix it and we understand the technology, now there are so many databases, there are so many things which are coming up. So it's very, very important to understand them and then fix it. And then there are broken authentication, sensitive data exposure, XML, external entity attack, then broken access control, security misconfiguration. Now, if we talk about all of this, this has been there, but it's just that sometimes we tend to miss out on the basics of it. And I'll tell you one of my favorite ones, which is A9, using
Yeah.
component with known vulnerabilities. And we have seen the biggest of breaches. One of my favorite is like Equifax, which I talk about it a lot, even though I have
Yeah.
friends working at Equifax. But if I say that uh, so that why are we using vulnerable components? So that's a classic example. I think most of the people are using the components which have vulnerabilities, or even third party libraries that we have in our code. And I was reading one
Yeah.
of the research that 80 to 90% of the code on the internet is open source, and even it's going to go increase only. Now if that much of code is open source, are we supposed to track it? Are we supposed to manage it? So it's very, very important to manage it and to take care of it, and not miss it. And if we are going to miss it and keep using all those vulnerable components knowingly or unknowingly, it will harm us. And that's why we are here. Tanya has written a book and she's talking about the chapter.
Yeah. So the OWASP Top 10 is like a list of the top 10 biggest, most dangerous risks to web apps. So it's vulnerabilities that affect web apps and like risks that affect web apps. Is it a standard? Can we
No,
just learn these 10 and then stop, Bandana?
not at all. If you think that it's just it, that means something big is gonna come for sure, and we should be ready and not ready for it. So
Yeah,
oh,
no, you.
I was just saying that OWASP Top 10 list is not just the list to follow. There are so many more things. OWASP Top 10 list is like voted upon by the industry, by the community, that okay, these are the high risks or critical risks that organizations have come across, people have seen, or people have come across. But then there is so many more things. And if we look at OWASP web testing guide, for every vulnerabilities, there are so many more equally attached vulnerabilities. There are so many CVEs attached to it. So if we just look at top 10 vulnerabilities and make it as a checklist, trust me, we are not even 10, 20% secure. People say that no, we are 100% secure. If you talk to anyone, even the people who have contributed to the project, they will say, no, you have to look at the big picture.
Yeah.
Understand your environment, understand which domain you are catering to, and then start working over it.
We have an awesome question in the chat from DJ. Has the OWASP Top 10 list changed over time, and how often is it reviewed? So Vandana already explained every 3 years approximately they release one. And because of all the weirdness in 2020, that's why we didn't release one in 2020. But it's changed. So some of it stayed the same, right? But some of it has changed. Like number one's been number one for what? 18 years? Injection, number one. But this edition of the OWASP Top 10 has like 2 brand new ones. I was thinking maybe we could talk about the 2 brand new ones, XXE and like lack of logging and monitoring, because they're new.
Right. So XXE came into picture wherein if you're using the XML parsers in your applications.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of XXE attacks that were coming into picture, and that's why it was voted upon. And same goes with logging and monitoring, where I would say that this is a very deep topic wherein people say that how do you manage logging and monitoring? It's not a vulnerability.
It's money.
Yes. So yeah.
No, you go. I think I have a story about logging and monitoring in the book that I want to read that I think will be funny.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, sure. So if I talk about logging and monitoring, that's a very, very interesting aspect about it. Like we have a lot of things which are vulnerable, but we are not monitoring it. If again go back to talk about Equifax case, wherein they had Apache, their systems were impacted. It and not just that, okay, they realize they are impacted and it just happened a couple of weeks ago. No, there were months, the attackers were there into the system months before. Now what was the problem? The systems were not monitored properly. And it's not just the case with one company, and I'm sorry if I'm just taking the name of the one company, it's not the story with them.
Oh
They
yeah,
tried their best to
false.
safeguard, but it's with everyone. If we don't monitor our systems, if we don't log it, it will be a big problem. Now how monitoring helps is it interconnect multiple systems and figure out, okay, where exactly things could go wrong. And similarly, if we don't log it, how about if something happens and we can't go back and check, oh, for how long it has been there in the system? We've seen cases of supply chain attacks. We have seen cases of multiple vulnerabilities chaining up and creating fuzz about it and creating so much havoc about it. So if we don't log and monitor, we will be in big, big trouble. And that's why I think most of the companies are talking about zero trust, zero trust, zero trust, wherein it emphasizes specifically that let's log it, let's monitor the whole system across, not just network but applications. And that's why we are talking about application level vulnerabilities.
I feel like with logging and monitoring, sometimes people, hi, little cutie. Um, for those listening later, Bandana's child has entered the image and he is super adorable. Um, so I feel like with logging, so I used to be a software developer and then I switched to security. And when I was a software developer, I would just log things for me. I wouldn't log things for the security team. I didn't care what they wanted. I almost never talked to them unless they were angry with me. But now that I work in security, I ask people, if someone is failing input validation, you should log that. Like if someone puts something into, let's say, a search field and it fails because it's not part of this list of letters and numbers that you've said are okay. So let's say you have a regular expression that is an approved list of stuff that's okay. So we're like, A to Z, uppercase and lowercase, all the numbers, and then we'll allow single quotes, and then we'll allow, what else? Open brackets and close brackets, but that's it, let's say. If something else tries to get put in, maybe we should log that, right? And maybe if someone, the same IP address, does it 10 times, what's going on there? Like normal users aren't trying to enter a username over and over again that has weird characters generally. So maybe our system should send an alert somewhere. And when I say send an alert somewhere, I mean where someone's going to read it. Bandana, I have written so many programs when I was a dev, and they're like, yeah, and then we'll send an email to this email inbox that no one looks at. And I'm like, no, I think it should go to a person or a team where everyone's looking at it, or it can go to like a ticket. Like it could make a ticket for us to look at it, or it could go to the security team. What do you think, like with logging and monitoring, what are some things that maybe people should make sure they're doing? Like, first of all, alert has to go to someone.
Right. And if I talk about alerts, there are so many SOC teams that have been set up specifically to monitor those alerts. Now, people must be thinking that what kind of alerts? So the alerts come from different systems, from IDS, IPSs, from like vulnerability management system. So it's like correlating different elements, and then the alert system goes to us, security information and event management, and people monitor. There could be someone who's trying to do SQL injection on our website. So those kind of attacks come there and we monitor it. And now that actually gives us a big view that, okay, or big picture that, okay, these are the kind of alerts that we are getting. We should block this IP. We should block such kind of traffic so that our application is not impacted. Now, there's a question which is there, the security integrity management is there. But let me tell you one very important aspect. Now, there's someone who says that, Kellen says that I like how some clouds will help with that. Now, if I talk about cloud, what's the first parameter that you have? Identities. And if the identities are not managed properly, nothing can be saved. And that's why, think about, you have a cloud account or a root account or a master account with any of the cloud providers, and the password is just 8 characters, 10 characters. How difficult would be for us to get your password? Super easy. Or an attacker to get your password. And if you're using a password which is easily guessable, nobody can save. I have seen organizations using the root account passwords. And okay, that's one thing. Think about the SSH keys, root account SSH keys being used on the production site. Who uses it? So those are the kind of things that create a problem, and that's when logging and monitoring comes into picture. And not just logging and monitoring, it's just one aspect of it. And when we talk about vulnerabilities, we just don't talk about one vulnerabilities. It always chains up, which actually creates a big impact. Not one vulnerability creates the huge impact. People chain up the vulnerabilities and make it big. And that's how it is impactful for any organization.
As usual, I agree with Bandana. Yep, absolutely. I feel like a big barrier for people using logging and monitoring is the cost. And I would like to know, I have no good answer to solve that. But it's expensive. But if you look at how much a breach costs, or a breach where there's no logs, that's very expensive. Like in January, I was helping a client respond to a security incident, and a bunch of data got breached, and they weren't sure if it was from them or from one of their partners who breached the data. And guess what? We had no logs, like zero. There was literally nothing. It was so hard to investigate. It took a really long time. And then we had to go into all the partners' systems and like talk with them about all of their stuff. And it took a really long time to figure out because we didn't have any logs. And I was like, see, this is why we need to turn this on, because you're giving me nothing to investigate. What can I do? Ugh. We have some good comments in the chat. So Roman's saying logging packet drops will overwhelm you. And I agree. And same for input validation, unsuccessful input validations. Yeah, I would say that you shouldn't alert just because someone misses an input validation one time. I would say it's more like if they do it 10 times, because the average user, humans are lazy. It's true. Like I know I am. I'm very impatient with a computer, and I'm not going to just keep trying and trying and trying over and over. What do you think, Bandana?
I agree with you. Absolutely. And even if I talk about logging and monitoring, people, even I can see the questions around that what to log is hard. I totally agree what to log is hard. But then comes the point that till the time we don't know our assets, we don't know our inventory, we don't know our applications, it will always be hard. And especially the cases that we have seen wherein people are not maintaining their enterprise application libraries. People are not maintaining or not able to maintain the inventories. That's when it becomes hard. And then another important aspect is when we talk about logging and monitoring, it becomes important that we understand what to log. Like if there are critical systems, restricted systems, those should be monitored. And those could be PCI systems, could be HIPAA systems, those should be monitored. So we need to categorize it, classify it. So data classification, asset classification is equally important. And it helps. It actually, it's like a big ecosystem, which is network, applications, data, servers, everything, the whole control plane, which is managing the data plane.
Yeah. Yeah. I also feel like, there's lots of questions in the chat, but first I'm just going to say the thing I was thinking to say is, so things to log are if something to do with security happens. So if someone tries to log in and they fail doing that once, if someone does log in successfully, log that. But if someone tries to log in 10 times unsuccessfully, you should issue an alert. If someone tries to log in 10 times in under a second, you should log an alert. If someone tries to log in 100 times, you should block that person. And then you should issue an alert. If someone is trying to get past your input validation, so for instance, 10 or more attempts quickly, like let's say in 10 seconds or less, human beings don't usually act that fast. So anything that resembles a bot, anything resembles trying to get around any sort of security control. And so a security control is the code that you write to try to do security stuff. Or it can be a product you bought. So let's say you're using Active Directory or Okta or something else to manage your identity. So if there's something to do where that's malfunctioning repeatedly, that's usually a security alert. And so if you log those things, and if you alert when it's multiple attempts or it looks like a bot activity, then the security team can respond. I also think there's things you should not log. So Bandana was saying HIPAA and PCI. So for instance, the sensitive health information that's part of HIPAA, you should not log that. The sensitive information that is part of PCI, so like credit cards, as well as expiries and PINs, you don't want to log that. You might log the last 4 numbers, but you don't want to log all the rest of the stuff. Oh, Callie is saying, I'm guilty of not logging before. Me too. Back when I was a dev, for many places I worked, they didn't want to pay for logging. They didn't want to pay for error handling even. And another thing that I like to log is if anything goes to the global exception handler. So it's my belief we should always try and then catch whatever we're doing. So we try to do some computer program thing, and then if there's an error, we catch it. But on top of that, for the entire system having a global exception handler. So that means if one of those catches doesn't catch it, for some reason there's an error and it's not caught, it doesn't just go to the screen with like a stack trace and you look all immature like you're not a good programmer. The global exception handler catches that. But I want to know that. That means somehow I messed up and I didn't catch an error. And that might be a security problem. And so I definitely log those. And you might want to alert on it depending upon how important that system is.
Yeah, and Tanya, I agree with you on these lines. Even when you were talking about logging through the passwords, it was just clicking me that after 5 attempts, I'm going to lock that account and I'm going to monitor it. And if it happens again within an hour, I'm going to again repeat it and I'm going to raise an alert that there is some problem, because a genuine person would never do it. And when you talk about the bots, there is a big problem. Now, on the same lines, that's not just about it. If from the same user on a server, there are some fishy activities which are going on, or maybe a user has been impacted with a phishing email where there is a traffic which is going on from the user system to some other application, those can also be tracked, wherein, okay, there are some failed attempts for the password, and at the same time, user traffic is going somewhere else. That means user system might be compromised. And now, if we think from an application perspective, what could be the issue? Now, there was someone in the chat, Tanya, who was asking that, oh, it'll be hard to manage the application libraries. Now, that's when we talk about monitoring those libraries, managing those libraries, and documentation, right? And I think this is something which we understand because you've been a dev, you've been a security, you've wore a security hat, you are managing a company. So these are very important aspects. If we forget to log one library, one framework, okay, this is what we are using. That means if it gets outdated, there is a new version comes in because of vulnerability, who will be held responsible for it if a breach happens? Because we don't know about it, that these things exist in the system. We are not logging them. We are not monitoring what we have in our system. So logging and monitoring is like a very big word wherein you are trying to manage your inventory, your events, your libraries and open source components and whatnot. Now, for example, we are using WordPress. WordPress releases a new plugin or an updated plugin, and we are still using the old plugin. Are we vulnerable? We are, because we have not updated it. Now, because we didn't know about it, even though WordPress now pings you every day, every other day that, oh, you're using this plugin, which is vulnerable. Oh, you are using this plugin, which we are vulnerable. So those things matter a lot. And if we do it later, and as you say, it costs even 10 times more than later. if we realize that there is a breach that has happened, or maybe 100 times. You don't know how much you'll be paying it to the people who've got access to your system.
Yeah. Ray asked a really good question, and I don't like it, but I want to ask it. So he asked two things. So one thing he asked that was really hard is, if no one's reading the logs, why are we logging? And Ray, I'm really hoping that the reason why we log is for if we need to investigate, and the reason why we issue alerts is because someone needs to be receiving and reading those alerts. People don't need to sit there and read all the logs all the time, but we need them so we can investigate when bad stuff happens, or just if there's annoying things happening, like if my API keeps crashing or this or that. Sometimes it's a security issue and we don't even realize it. And so that's why I feel we log, is so that we can investigate problems while we alert, so that we can take action immediately, in my opinion, or in my dreams.
No, I totally agree with you. I think, Tani, you're right. Because these things, people say that even if nobody is watching and we don't do the right thing, that means when the problem knocks at the door, we would never be ready for it. And that's why we'll say, oh, we don't have the data. Oh, we don't know how many users got breached. Oh, who should be informed? We don't know about it. And that's where all the fines, all the legalities come into picture. So compliance is not just a checklist, it's so much more. And all of these things are equally important and needed at this time, the kind of attacks that we are seeing.
Yeah. Okay, so Ray had another good question that I actually don't know the answer to. So he was saying, are there logging frameworks or libraries that can help people log things like 10x attempts and n seconds? And honestly, I'm not sure. I haven't been a dev in a long time. Do you know, Bandana?
Yeah, so Tanya, if we talk about logging, these are the things, like if there is a person who's doing it 10 times, that's why we have SIM solutions in place, SIEM solutions. Those solutions help us, because this is not a job of a dev to monitor it. And that's why the whole organization is responsible for a security. Devs don't monitor the logs and systems. If there's something that is there in the code, they do it from that perspective. But if there are 10 login attempts failure, there is a SOC team, security operations system center, specialized team who monitors it. So in security is so huge. Everyone has a different role. I'll tell you about myself. I started as a network security person, then moved to SOC, moved to application security, cloud security. So security is so huge, and everyone has a role to play in that. Dev has a role. They try and play very well, but we try and force security on them without even training them. And when it comes to logging, we can't ask them to monitor that. There is a team who does that. I hope that answers Ray's question.
Oh yeah, no, that was a great answer. Okay, I briefly want to talk about XML external entities. So I'm just going to briefly give some background for people that are new. So XML was created so we could pass like data back and forth. So now modern applications usually use JSON, but we used to use XML. And I remember when XML came out, because I've been working in tech a very long time. And I remember thinking, so the reason why it's called XML is it's extensible. That's what X stands for. And I know it really starts with E because it's EX, but just ignore that. But the way and the reason why it came out was so that you could write your own definition files. So you could make a DTD file that said, this is how my XML is going to look. And then the other file would have all the data in it, and it would be tagged in that way. So XML looks like tags, almost like HTML. You'll have an open bold tag, and then you'll have some stuff, and you'll have a closed bold tag. But instead it's for data. So it's like name, like open tag name, and then it'd be Tanya, and it's closed tag name. And so you could make these DTD files and let people define their own. But very quickly we realized no one was doing that. That was a lot of work for no reason. We're not going to let every random person just submit a definition file. But we kind of forgot about it. And then hackers realized, I'll make my own definition file and see if they'll accept it. And so they would send their own DTD file with their own definition for XML. And if the server accepts it, they're like, great. And then they send a data file full of attacks. And then bad things happened. And so we basically gave users a bit too much power. And honestly, before the OWASP Top 10 brought it up, I never even knew this vulnerability existed. Like as soon as I read it and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Oh, crap. But apparently pen testers and malicious actors have known about it for a really long time. And even though it surprised me, I'm sure it surprised a lot of software developers. What do you think? Is this like new and surprising, or are you like, I knew about that 100 years ago?
For me, I would say I was very new to it. When it was released, I started to get into know more about it. And then that too, it was not there in every application. There were some specific applications that had the XXC. So I had to learn, and it took me good time to understand, learn. And the fun fact, I was about to train people around OWASP Top 10, and then this vulnerability came into picture. So I had to learn myself, make sure that I know it well so that I can explain it to people. So how exactly XML parsers work, how DTDs work, and if an XML output is coming, how exactly will it look like? And if there is no validation, how will it look like? So explaining that was a big challenge.
Yeah, but the defense is sort of easy. Just don't accept DDT files. Just be like, no, thanks, I'm good. Just turn it off on the server.
No inputs like, no, from the external.
Yeah. Did you know, Bandana, that lots of old systems, you can't turn it off? I have lots of clients that have a whole bunch where they can't turn it off. So then we have to deploy a web app firewall and be like, no, we don't want those. Thank you.
Tani, tell me one thing. When we talk about WAF, does it really help with the XXC?
I don't know. With those clients, so if they're on a system that is so old that it accepts DDT files and you can't turn it off, usually that app is a total dumpster fire of badness. And so quite often I give it the dumpster fire treatment. So like, let's network segment, let's put a WAF in front of it. But yeah, I guess it wouldn't really help with XML external entities, because if the server's just like, okay, that sounds nice, but can't you block certain types of files with a WAF or no?
I think it depends on the WAFs, what kind of WAF we are using and the rules that we are using on it. I think that's going to help us big time for sure.
Yeah.
Because that's
and
acting
also,
like a compensating. Please go ahead. Sorry.
No, please continue.
I was just saying, I think it's going to act like a good compensating control. When we can't block it, we'll just have something in front of it to detect, to block at a certain level.
Another thing you can do with WAFs or RASPs is you can control what goes out. So you can actually put a WAF on things going out from your app. And so you can say like anything that looks like this type of file or anything that looks like this type, like you can say like that's not allowed going out, which was something I just learned last year. I was like, ooh, that's pretty neat. So it depends on, again, on the system you buy, but like you can stop certain types of things from going out and saying like, this is not allowed. And I was like, oh, well, that's pretty helpful. Because mostly my work with WAFs has always been like the pen tester that's like punch, 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 as opposed to the actual implementing, turning it on person.
Right. Agree with you. But yeah, that's a very funny angle and an important angle to it, that people think that, oh, we have a WAF in front of our application, we are 100% secure. I have seen people saying that. I've heard people saying that, like, oh, we are using WAF, we are all secure. We have monitoring systems, we are all good about it. And then when something happens, they realize that they did not configure it well. And at the same time, there was something which are coming inside and they didn't monitor it well. They didn't check it. Oh, they didn't correlate it well. And that's where the problem lies. We can spend huge amount of money on the system, process, technology, everything. But till the time we don't have a right system to manage those vulnerabilities, it's as good as not doing anything.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Bandana. That is a whole can of worms. that I totally want to talk about, but I also want to answer one of the really good questions in the chat. Hirini, I hope I'm saying that correctly. So she's saying she first learned about OWASP through the API security top 10. So there's an OWASP top 10 list, like vulnerabilities list for web apps. That's the main one everyone knows. But there's also top 10 risks to APIs, top 10 risks to, IoT devices. And there's one for serverless, and one is coming for medical devices. And it's the top 10 risks of things. So the reason why there's different lists is because the things that you need to worry about with an API are different than the things for a web app, than the things for a serverless app, than the things for an IoT device, or especially a medical device. It's very different types of risks. And so they made separate lists, and they had different experts weigh in on those lists so that we could highlight the differences. Because if you only look at the OWASP top 10 risks for web apps, if you only look at that for all your defenses, you're in trouble. But if you concentrate on that, but you're working on APIs or you're working on serverless apps, you're going to miss a bunch of things that are very special just for those specific types of applications or software. And we really don't want you to miss important things. And so that's why there's different lists. I hope that answers your question. Oh, yeah, there's one more. Sorry, you.
No. I was just saying, Tanya, you're right. And there are things which come as part of the APIs from the object level, from the excessive data exposure. And even when we talk about APIs, we test them separately to understand what kind of data they are taking, what kind of data they are handling, whether we are allowing it the full access or minimal access. Because one API, if it has full access and that gets breached, that means nobody can save us. So that's why there is a separate top 10 list which talks about many things, talking about broken user authentication, to excessive data exposure, to mass assignment, to so much more. And if we don't manage those APIs well, we will never be able to manage especially if I'll say that we are talking about microservices, we are talking about latest and greatest technologies, we're talking about cloud. So when we are calling these APIs, they need to be properly vetted, what kind of data they are handling.
So there's one more question in the chat from Roman. Couldn't web services accepting DTD use XSLT to input, check, and transform into benign data? I don't know. I don't know. It's very rare that there's a real business reason that you actually need to accept DTD files. But if you are going to accept them, definitely I agree that you should do input validation on them. And could you use a web service to do that? Definitely, potentially, for sure. But I don't know what XSLT is, honestly. I don't know what that is. If you want to add more to your question, Roman, you can. But definitely, if you must accept a DTD file, you should definitely verify that it's safe before you start using it. I agree. I want to answer the questions at the back of the book. So if you go to page 112 in the book, there are some questions. And we have, just a second, there's something in my private chat for me, which is usually important. Oh, it means extensible style sheet language transformations. Ooh, thank you so much. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's the thing you would use to verify it. It sounds like it is, though. But I don't know the answer. I'm big on admitting when I don't know, because then I look less dumb later if I'm wrong.
No, I think there's something, so the best part about these kind of conversation is that there's something new that comes up and we learn about that. And we understand, oh, okay, this is how it can be approached as well. So I think it's a learning for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I have shared a link that Bandana really shared. She did the typing. So there are a couple questions in the back of the book. So these sessions are for us to discuss some of these questions. So if you went to page 117 in the book, there's 6 questions, and there's not that many questions, but I was hoping that we could go over them so that we could talk about basically like some of the answers and what we think of them. And for anyone that has read this book and then they went and looked at the questions and they weren't quite sure, I want to provide a full answer. And so the first question is, if someone on your project team wants to accept serialized objects from an untrusted source. Oh, it doesn't say if, it says someone does want to accept serialized objects from an untrusted source. And in the book, we talk about accepting serialized objects and how that's very dangerous, because then you can have a deserialization vulnerability. You know that this is a bad idea. How do you explain the risk effectively to your teammate? Write your answer down, be persuasive and clear. So what are the reasons, Bandana, that we probably shouldn't accept serialized objects from strangers?
Because if we start serializing those objects from the strangers, we will end up accepting not so good objects, and that we'll start accepting and processing it. And what will happen when the deserialization will happen? That means that will impact our web application, and that might be very, very impactful for our users as well. So when we talk about serializing the objects, this is a whole process that goes in, that there is a serialization and then the deserialization. So the input that comes into as part of the array, like a whole list. So whatever users share inputs, it goes one by one, it stacks up. So if there is a bad input that comes from the user, goes into the stack, and when someone calls it, it becomes deserialized, and you get a bad input, and you'll be like, oh, what it is happening. So I'm just trying to say it in as normal layman terms as possible.
Cool. Okay, so I am going to say something about deserialization. So we serialize objects so that we can pass them over a stream to someone else or something else, usually, from a user to a web app, or from a web app to an API, and we do that for simplification. However, if we are accepting a serialized object from someone, if we don't trust that system, it could contain an attack. And there's actually been lots and lots of conference talks about this. I remember the first one was Why So Serial, as in Why So Serious, which I don't know why, but I find incredibly funny. And a lot of people talk about it just in relation to Java, but there's actually potential deserialization attacks in .NET, my beloved .NET. I write in the book how I really like .NET. Anyway, and other languages too. And so the best way to defend against that is to just not accept serialized objects from anyone unless it's a source that is within your own application or your own systems, and you have a reason to trust those systems. You would also want to make sure that it is encrypted in transit. You would want to make sure that you have authentication and authorization between the two systems, so no one somehow replaced that object and changed it. I also want to kind of handle the next question by myself. So the next question I wrote, so the next question is the OWASP Top 10 a standard, yes or no? No, it's not. But the reason why I go on and on and on about this in the book, and the reason why I felt the need to have a question about it, is because literally constantly I see companies saying, well, we want to be OWASP Top 10 compliant. We want to be OWASP compliant. We want to make sure that we are we follow this standard. I'm like, it's not a standard. It's a list of the 10 worst things. If you only worry about those 10 things, you're missing a lot. It's much better to concentrate specifically on the 10 best defenses and making sure that you have implemented all of them the best you absolutely can, rather than trying to defend against only 10 things. There's hundreds and hundreds of types of vulnerabilities, if not thousands and thousands. And because of that, it can never be a standard. And if you ask the people that created the top 10, like they created it as an awareness document. They created it so that we could try to grab the attention of software developers and draw them towards security so that we could try to enlighten them and start to teach them and start the conversation. The people that created the top 10 never, ever wanted it to be the end of your security efforts. They wanted it to be the first step. I had a pen tester write me once and say, which version of the top 10 should I use for my pen test? And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, those are the things I'm going to check, those 10 things, and then I'm done. I was like, no. So I guess I just really, really wanted to stress that they're the same, or that it is the start. It is not the finish. And so then the next question is exactly in the same vein, number 3. Name 3 of the top 10 that we already covered in this book before chapter 5. So we cover defenses. I'm just going to go in the book to the list of the top 10 so I can go through all of them. So in the book, we cover how to defend against injection, and that's input validation and parameterized queries. Then broken authentication. We have a whole giant section about authentication. Then sensitive data exposure. There's an entire section on how to protect sensitive data. Then XML external entities. So we did not cover that in the book until this chapter. Then if we go on to number 5, broken access control, we have a giant section on access control. And by we, I mean, I guess I have it because I wrote the whole book. So then security misconfiguration. So we cover that in a whole bunch of different spots all throughout the book, but then we zero in on it here. Then in number 7, cross-site scripting. So the defenses for cross-site scripting are basically input validation and output encoding. And we cover those both in depth in chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. We are all over input validation and output encoding. Insecure deserialization, that's number 8. That's the first time that we cover it is in chapter 5. Using components with known vulnerabilities. We cover this quite a bit in chapters 3 and 4. And then chapter 9, insufficient logging and monitoring. We talk about logging and monitoring in the chapters that lead up to this chapter. And so I wanted you to know that this book covers tons and tons of defenses that cover way more than just this 10, right? And that's what I want you to focus on. I want you to focus on defending and doing big defenses that cover many types of vulnerabilities, rather than just focusing on 10 problems. I want to focus on many solutions that block way more than just one thing that's wrong. And so I realize I'm on a soapbox. I realize I'm like very excited, etc. But we have a question in the chat that I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to go back to the questions. So Daniel's asking a really good question, which I'm going to put on the screen. Can you briefly explain HSTS to me? Any reason why a JWT token is considered an element of security feature in API? I really don't see any security in it. Please prove me otherwise. Okay, so those are 2 totally separate questions, Daniel. So I will answer both of them, but separately. So the first one, HSTS, is a security header. And it makes sure that you are using TLS to and from. It means if someone tries to connect to your web app or your API using HTTP, it says, oh, no, what you meant was HTTPS. We want this to be encrypted. And it just redirects, and it won't let someone connect unencrypted to your app. So that's what the security header does. It's just like, nope, I do not accept unencrypted. I do not accept unencrypted connections, words. But the second question is, any reason why JWT is considered an element of security? So a JWT token used to be unencrypted. It used to be base64 encoded. So that meant anything that you put inside of this token that you're sending could be viewed by an attacker, which meant you should not put sensitive information like passwords or social insurance numbers or credit card numbers or anything else like that. But now the newer version, so I think it's 2.0 version of JWT tokens, does have encryption. Yes, good job to those guys, because they realized it was a problem. As for if it is an element of security for an API, the idea is that by passing a token, you can identify yourself. You're like, hey, it's still me. I'm Tanya. Here's my token to prove it. That's the idea of passing a token back and forth. I hope this helps. Hey, Bandana, what's up? Okay, I'm going to let Bandana back in. I know I had to step up on my soapbox for a minute to give lectures about OWASP and how it is definitely not standard, the top 10. It's an amazing, awesomely powerful awareness document and the start, not the end of your security journey. Okay, I'm gonna let Bandana talk. So question 4 is, does the XML external vulnerability apply to JSON or YAML?
No.
There's no XML. I know it's a trick question. It's a dirty question, Bandana. It does not apply to JSON or YAML because there's no XML in JSON. There's no XML in YAML. But I've had people ask me that, so I thought I would just throw it in there. Okay, so let's give you a real question. So there's 2 questions. There's 5 and 6. So you can pick which one you want, Bandana. So number 5 is, name an example of a race condition. And number 6 is, why do we roll back incomplete transactions and why does it matter?
So I'll take the second question. I'll take the second question.
Okay, right. Awesome.
Now, if we talk about rolling back the incomplete transactions, because if we don't roll back, there is a huge hit that's going to happen. And now, should I talk from a security perspective or just a normal, the whole flow perspective? So
either one you want.
So from a normal flow perspective, let's say you've paid to a vendor, you're just doing shopping and you like, especially at the time of sale. So you bought something and a problem comes that your money has been deducted and the order has not been completed. So if the money doesn't come to you, would you be happy? No. Would you be happy with the vendor? No. Would you be fighting with your bank? Yes. So that's why they need to roll back and make sure that your money gets credited back into your account. Or it'll be a big fraud and you can try and file a complaint against the vendor, against the bank, that why that is happening. I did not receive the product. The transaction did not get complete and I need to get my money back. And we always do. And there is a process that if the order has not been completed, the money has to go back to the bank or to the person's account within 2 to 3 business days. And that's how every bank says.
I'm eating masala. I did not milk any cows. But anyway, that's such a great answer. So I'm going to answer the other question, name an example of a race condition, but I'm going to add on to your example. So Vandana's example, she's like, you know, if you're buying something and the transaction gets interrupted partway through and we don't roll back the transaction, you could pay and get no product. So in the book, I talk about the Starbucks vulnerability. So I have a habit and I buy Starbucks a lot. I should just buy stocks in that company. I really like it a lot. I am embarrassed at how often I want to visit that cafe. But anyway, the point is not my addiction to frou-frou delicious coffee drinks. So this guy, this amazing security researcher, he figured out, so if I get 5 different Starbucks cards, like loyalty cards, I can try to transfer the money to one card, but press the transfer button 5 times really quickly, and it would get confused and it would only deduct the money from the original card once. And so he could basically 5x his money every time he was sending it back and forth. So he figured out a way to have a race condition. So he would say, transfer the money, but so the way that the system worked is it would say, I'm going to send the money, and it would send it, and then it would go back and remove the money. And so in the time where it sent the money, it would go back, check the balance, and it looked like it was okay. And so he just kept sending the money back and forth. But if there had been a walk on the card that said, okay, Tanya's card only has $5, but the fancy frou-frou coffee she wants is $5.50. If I transfer the money to another card, and I also transfer it to a third card and a fourth card and a fifth card, it says transfer the money. And then it goes back and it tries to take the money away from the first card. But meanwhile, because there's no walk on that card, it just goes and it tries to remove the money, but the money's not there. And then it didn't, remember Bandana saying roll back, it didn't roll back the transaction. And so then what happened is it put $5 on 4 different cards, and then Tanya can buy a whole bunch of tasty treats. And so this guy figured out basically how to get free fancy coffee for life. And then because he is an ethical security researcher, he told Starbucks, and they gave him a bounty of cash money. But I personally would prefer free Starbucks for life. But, you know, I'm not a criminal, so I would tell them to. And then he wrote a really cool blog article about it and about exactly how he did it. The first time I encountered a race condition was when I was 20 years old. So, of course, I worked at a software company because I've been a nerd for life. And I'm at the software company, and my boss and I, it turned out we were programming the same part of this big system that would manage bill of materials for this giant steel company. And so we wrote all the software on all their internal computers for them. And he had written something where it would update stuff in the database, but it wouldn't lock the table. And so I wrote something to update it, and I removed something that I shouldn't have because he hadn't locked the table. And so he's like, hey, you just stole my, whatever the little part was that I had taken out. And he's like, what's going on? And the numbers weren't adding up. And it turned out the thing we had written separately, we're both trying to deduct screws and bolts and washers, but without locking the table. And so he would remove some and I would remove some at the same time. And because the transaction didn't lock the table, we had the wrong numbers. So it told me there's 5 and it told him there's 5, but then we both took 3 out and it didn't know what to do and it crashed. And so that he taught me, he's like, you have to lock the table if you're going to do a transaction. Imagine you're writing a book like this book and you have 2 technical editors, Eli and Dominique. And we had to have a copy where they would edit it and send it to me. We couldn't all work in the same one because one of them would be changing something, one of them would be adding something, one of them would be putting comments. I would be trying to fix the stuff that they wrote. It would be a mess. So we had the main real copy, and then they would put comments, and then I would be the one that could adjust the real copy. And so it's really important that we don't have 2 or 3 or more competing processes for the same resource. And this is why either you lock a resource or you have a fancy merge feature. Like if you're using Google Docs, I don't know if someone else is editing too, but as long as you're not editing the same place, it seems to know what to do. These are all not only regular features to make sure your software works correctly. In many cases, these are security features. These are controls to make sure that the integrity and availability and confidentiality of your system continues. Yeah. I'm not sure if I answered that in like a super clear way. Did that make sense, Bandana?
Absolutely. I think I answered something, but then you made a really cool example. And someone says that it was a cool example.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I've just had it happen to me so many times. Then when I joined security, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a security issue. I thought it was just a me not making a good software issue. Because of course, when you write software, you want it to work really well and have your clients really love it, right? And so I was like, oh, my clients are angry. This is awful. I must fix this. But yeah, it's also a security thing. Because what if, me and my old boss, when I was like 20 years old, what if we hadn't noticed our colliding things? And then this giant steel company has like run out of parts and then they have to shut down the production line. Shutting down the production line is like really, really expensive. It would be a huge disaster and they would be really angry at our company that was in charge of their software. So it's really good that we figured it out before we shipped it to the customer. Yeah. So those are all the questions in the book for this, because it's only a 12-page chapter. It's the smallest chapter. Do you have, so first of all, does anyone in the chat have any more questions? And Bandana, is there anything that you wanted to add? Because I feel like we kind of like wrapped up the questions really a lot faster than I intended.
I would say that this question has been asked a couple of times, that OWASP is taken as a standard or a benchmark. I would say just take it, okay, these are the top level vulnerabilities we should look at. But there is the big picture that we need to look at. We need to understand our application, our domain, and based on that, start making our own checklist. So for me, from my experience, I always had a checklist. Okay, these are the things that I will do for sure. But based on payment card, if it's accepting payments or cards, I used to handle it a bit different way. If it's a social media site, I'll handle it a bit different way. So I think it's a good way to know, okay, these are the things that we should look at and not forgetting anything and everything. And I would say consider checking testing guide as well. If you are new to the web application testing, if you want to understand what kind of bugs that can come in, a lot of times, and most of the times, that helps a lot. And even I'll tell you, or maybe I'm talking about OWASP a lot, wherein I was about to talk about ASVS. That actually is a really, really nice checklist, which helps.
Okay, so ASVS stands for OWASP, well, Application Security Verification Standard. So ASVS. So if you look up OWASP, OWASP, and then ASV, like Victor S, you will find an 80-page checklist of things to verify that your software is secure. It's like the ultimate pen testing guide. It's really good. And also long and hard.
I love it. I love it, Tanya, because I know that from web testing guide, I was making my own checklist and it took me good months to prepare it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
When I went to my team and told, okay, this is something which I have prepared. And then somebody came back to me and said, have you ever seen ASVS? And I'm like, okay, now what is that? When I looked at it, I was like, why did I create it?
You basically wrote your own copy of ASVS.
Yes.
Then
realized.
So Bandana, do you have any upcoming events or anything that you would like to promote?
Yes. So I can actually talk about my two things. One is Spotlight series, where I cover a lot of OWASP projects because of OWASP love. So I talk about different projects, Top 10, ASVS, and all the other projects which are part of OWASP. And another thing, to all the developers and security people and students, we have an OWASP conference coming up, which is AppSec Days OWASP Developers Summit, which is unique in its own ways because it's developer friendly, talking about how developers are important and they're contributing towards security. And that is coming on 24th of July, so which is just around the corner. So you can register yourself. The tickets are still open and it's totally free conference to attend. And we have mentioned all the time zones, everything that's there. If you feel there's something missing, please do feel free to let me know so that I can update the developers outreach program. So it's a program that OWASP has created to bring more developers close to OWASP.
Yes.
Yes.
I would like to promote that next Friday, and by that I mean July 16th, I'm speaking at the Diana Initiative. And I'm speaking virtually because it's a virtual conference. And I believe it's free or very low cost. And the idea of the conference is they want to really put a spotlight on women and other people who are underrepresented in technology, but everyone can attend this awesome event. And there are so many amazing women and non-binary speakers. And I really want to encourage people to check out the Diana Initiative. And we're going to do chapter 6 of Alice and Bob Learn Application Security on August 7th. Saturday, August 7th, we're going to handle chapter 6. And chapter 6, obviously, I should know what it's about since I wrote the book. It is about testing and deployment. So I hope people can join us. Bandana, thank you so very much. I'm so happy that I could have you here to talk about like the OWASP Top 10. I feel like you really made this chapter much better, this session.
And I would just say I'm honored and privileged to be part of the show. And thank you so much for inviting me. It was such a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure. I am just going to put this on the screen for 1 second. So if you want to check out the Diana Initiative, their actual website is dianainitiative.org for anyone listening to this after who's not watching. Thank you everyone for coming. We really, really appreciate it. We hope we get to see some of you next month. Thank you so much, Bandana, for saying yes and being on the show. You might not be aware, Bandana's in India, and this is not a good time for her. It is really late. So I really, really, really appreciate the fact that she stayed up extraordinarily late to make this session. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I will see all of you next month, if not before, and I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday or Sunday morning, if that is the case.